Learned that every day over these past 7 or 8 weeks as I've stood up here day in and day out and read out numbers of people who have died. We do know that lives are at stake with this virus. Then, for as long as that continues to be the case, I am going to continue to err on the side of caution, err on the side of saving lives and reducing the number of people who might die unnecessarily. And I hope I have your continued understanding in doing that. However, I also want to give you as much visibility and advance notice of future changes as possible. We can't live like this forever, so we need to get some normality back as we continue to suppress the virus. So we've tried to set out, as we have done in recent weeks, on an ongoing basis as much of our thinking and consideration as we can. So even where we can't yet give firm dates of when things will open up again, at least we will seek to share with you the order of priority and potential phasing. So I'll give you an indication now that next week I will share with you more information on the assessments we're making and the range of options that we're now looking at, and also any further minor changes that we might make in the short term.
And as with every coronavirus, past and present, it begins to dwindle out as the weather gets warmer and the summer months begin to roll in. But as per usual, we have Thin Lips standing at a podium to give off the illusion that it's the work they're doing and lives are at stake, so we need to continue doing what we're doing. We need to continue this lockdown to prevent lives from being taken before their time. If you want to believe that, you'll believe anything, because as the stats really do show at this point, the majority of people that do die from this, small in numbers, but they have underlying health issues, and or are old, more often than not. Relatively old. And as I've pointed out on numerous occasions before now, 23,000 plus died in 2017/18 in Scotland due to the flu and pneumonia, yet Scotland wasn't shut down. Under 2,000 people have died in Scotland due to what they claim is COVID-19, and we have completely shafted our economy, made unemployment skyrocket, and whether or not we'll be able to pull ourselves out the other side of this is a different matter entirely. As the latest in a long line of shit to come out of the Department of Rainbow Unicorn Land, or their HQ even, is this: we can't simply return to the way things were after this pandemic. Now, a few things to note is right off the bat here. First and foremost, what the video at the beginning showed, combined with this, they need to prolong this and they need to continue the propaganda, the fear campaign, etc., for as long as they can, to condition the public into believing that things will never go back to the way things are. They have to condition the public, propagandize the public into believing that every death that occurs is attributed to COVID-19 because there's really a deadly pandemic out there. But second of all, we can't simply return to the way things were after this pandemic. Now, the trope of a new normal was coined several weeks ago, and we've never heard the end of it. But this new normal, from Thin Lips' own mouth, from the bullcat-headed Thin Lips' own mouth, she said that it was trying to acclimatise to living alongside said virus. Now we're talking about this continuing after the pandemic. Anyway, then it says we have to start building a brighter future for Scotland. Here we go. Here we go. We now need a new social contract between our government and our citizens about how we can make that happen. Now, I've stated on numerous occasions before, anybody that's been on my channel for any length of time, or anybody that follows the treachery that takes place here in Rainbow Unicorn Land from Thin Lips and her cabal, you'll know yourself that everything under their control and power has depleted. And what I mean by that is the standard of living in Scotland, homelessness, poverty, child poverty, food banks, etc., as well as other things like the education sector and whatnot. Everything under their control has depleted. Scotland has got worse as a country under their control. They're exploiting the impoverished is something that I've touched upon on several occasions, and I stand by that. We have a bunch of socialists in waiting, socialists in sheep's clothing, who seem to have the ability to make things worse when they could mitigate these issues. They blame austerity, etc., that they are the root cause of the problem, nobody else, them. So as poverty continues to increase, as people's standard of living continues to worsen in Scotland, they then dangle carrots, they then have the so-called solutions. They wouldn't be able to stand there, or they would have no credibility, no leg to stand on if there was no poverty, for example, in this country. So they have all these so-called solutions to solve or mitigate poverty, but you need to keep voting for them. Like that, for example, on the screen. SNP Commission considering universal basic income for independent Scotland. So, what happened to not playing party politics? But more importantly, put that to one side. This is about dangling a carrot, or planting the metaphorical seeds to let them germinate, so you vote for them again next time. Remind me again how they won the last election? By promising independence again. And now they're talking about independence again. The only way to get out of poverty, the only way to increase your standard of living is via voting for them, and by extension getting your so-called independence. As the Wikipedia article to the right-hand side of the screen now has you reminded of. Within the European Union, of course. And they're not civic nationalists. They're socialists. Bordering on communist. So anyway, with that said, there's Social Justice and Fairness Commission, building a fairer Scotland with well-being at its heart. The Social Justice and Fairness Commission was established by Nicola Thinlips to consider options for independence, but also action that could be delivered now. Is that so? And scrolling through the membership, or the members of, the Social Justice and Fairness Commission, you get a bit of an idea as to some of the things that they intend to implement, such as Graham Campbell and Michelle Campbell, presumably related, or married, I don't know. Two individuals who are in this video that I made on the 14th of October 2019. So I'll let this play just to give you a bit of a reminder, or if you're new to the channel, welcome to the Rainbow Unicorn Lands, New Scots.
People unconsciously, subtly have these things in them because we are born into a racist society. All of us have this, by the way. Me too. You know, we all have it because our country has this history of white supremacy and racism and imperialism. So if we want to decode that, dismantle it, decolonize it, we have to name it and shame it and actually work out what these institutions are and how they work. Unconscious bias is part of institutionalized patterns of discrimination. We have to look at the institutions, try to dismantle them a bit and actually move on from it because we're tackling the problem directly and naming it honestly and having an honest discussion about it. This applies obviously across all discriminations. But I wanted to sort of really finish my remarks by saying this, my own experience, I suppose. I'm very confident that the future of Scotland will be a very non-racial and anti-racist country because we are grappling with rejecting an imperialist British viewpoint of what a nation is and what it can be. We're rejecting an ethnocentric definition of what that nation is. We're setting an example of civic nationalism and inclusion, which means that we have a national identity which is going to be different. It's not going to be what it is now. We're preparing a future where people can define a Scots person non-racially. But for that to be possible, the reality of the inequality economically in the labour market, you know, I look at my own council, we have 15% BME people in the city, but only have less than 3% in the workforce. That cannot be right. There's institutional mechanisms for stopping people getting work in my local authority. And I'm sure that's true with public bodies across this country. So the rhetoric is good. Our rhetoric is unmatched. Our laws are brilliant, but they've got to match with the practical outcomes that happen in the wider society. And if there are barriers, if there are institutions that are stopping people, we need to remove them and be conscious of the fact of the need to remove them.
I'm an elected councillor in Renfrewshire, where 0.8% of the population are not white, and I am
Not Scottish, you mean?
the only BAME councillor in that area.
What a shock.
Of the hate crime that is in the general society area.
Not convictions, reports. And she's going to go on to say 50% or so. But that could be rather misleading, or it is misleading, because there could have been 10 so-called hate crimes in Renfrewshire, and 5 of them were racist hate crimes, quote-unquote. So therefore, that would give you the total of 50%. Anyway.
50%, slightly over 50% of that is racism. That's a shocking statistic.
It's also bullshit. Then we have Dr. Nigheet Riaz, who had this to say: funding for Gaelic discriminates against Muslims. A former SNP Holyrood candidate has claimed anti-Muslim racism is seeping into Scottish education because language policies treat ethnic minorities as inferior to white Scots. White Scots. Therefore, giving way to black Scots and Asian Scots. No, white Scots are Scots. Scots are white. I'm sorry, but this has got to stop. Anyway, I digress. Then says She's an academic at the University of the West of Scotland, and she said Gaelic was promoted in giving millions of pounds in ring-fenced public funding. Our funding for our language! While the traditional language of non-white groups were sidelined in school. Traditional language of non-white groups. Our traditional language gets priority because it's our country, but that's a problem. That's a fucking problem. So that gives you a bit of an indicator as to what this is really all about. Then of course we've got Alison Thulis, a rainbow unicorn feminist. We have this Aileen Campbell, another rainbow unicorn feminist. The one that was, I've got the video on my channel where she dismissed the idea of attributing hate crime protections to Christians, the same hate crime protections that were granted to Muslims just a month prior. Yeah, that's the sort of people we're dealing with here. So anyway, building a fairer Scotland with well-being at its heart. The Social Justice and Fairness Commission was established by Nicola Thinlips, aka the United Nations, to consider options for independence, but also action that could be delivered now to make Scotland a better place to live for all of us. We were getting on just fine before the SNP decided to take matters into their own hand and implement things that they weren't actually voted for in the first place. However, if they implement it alongside the idea of this of independence, they'll continue to win. As we look to rebuild from the current non-existent crisis, because the borders are open, created by the pandemic. Oh, the pandemic, quote unquote, created this so-called crisis. Nothing to do with shutting down the economy. Nothing to do with Nicola Sturgeon erring in the side of caution, supposedly. No. It's the pandemic. Our work has a vital role in play in harnessing the best ideas being discussed and distilling them into workable, coherent proposals. Some of these we could take forward now, while others would require independence. As we recover and rebuild, we must not return to the way things were. As we recover and rebuild, we must not return to the way things were. Bit of a confliction going on here. One saying that we can't, and one saying that we cannot. We can use many of the changes we have already embraced to create a fairer nation where everyone is recognised and rewarded for the contribution they make. Now define fairer, because from where I'm sat, it's about equality of outcome. As the Commission's Convener and Vice Convener, we want to set out how, as we come to terms with living with the presence of this virus, we can all play our part in building a better Scotland with well-being at its heart. What the fuck has this got to do with living alongside a virus? Can people not put two and two together here and realise that there's something not quite right with all of this implementations and suggestions and legislation, etc, etc? None of this has any relevance to a so-called virus. We can all play our part in building a better Scotland with well-being at its heart, and how the work of the Commission can help us with that process. Another commission, another unelected, faceless commission, full of people such as these arseholes. The safety net did not simply... the current situation has shone a stark light in the failings of our society. Not the least the fact that the safety net that we imagined was there simply did not exist. The safety net, did not simply wither away over time. It has been deliberately dismantled because of the political ideology of successive UK governments. What are you talking about? If you're talking about the benefit system, yeah, that has been eaten away at. And who gets priority in the benefit system now? Who has been shafted over the years in the benefit system? Can't say what I really want to say in that regard, can I? But while most are quite rightly putting party politics aside at this time to focus on saving lives, the amount of people dying in this country, the amount of cases in this country has been declining. And some evidence shows, or some stats show, that it actually started occurring before the lockdown. And in comparison to other countries that never implemented a lockdown, we're not much better, or not much worse, I should say. So what do you mean saving lives? This all started in regards to not overburdening the NHS. And now they've shifted the goalposts and it's about preventing deaths in general. You can't do that. Going by your own logic, that's impossible. If there's some deadly pandemic out there that somehow essential workers and people at Tesco's shopping can't catch, then it's an inevitability that people are going to die. But however, we should not forget that the impact of lockdown is political. And if we want to build something better than we have right now, then that will require a big shift in political thinking and decisions, as well as the actions of every one of us. The impact of lockdown is political. Yeah, your politics. It's your party that's prolonging this extension. Progress is always constrained by what is considered achievable and desirable. Progress. One of the most important lessons we must learn from the current situation is that we can make changes, big changes, when we need to. One of those changes must reflect the need to properly recognise and reward those undertaking work essential to our society and well-being. Our ambition, not the people's ambition, the SNP's ambitions. But if they talk about independence, you'll vote for them, won't you? And you'll clap on a Thursday. As we recover from the pandemic, we have already recovered from the pandemic to a massive extent. although you wouldn't realise with this lockdown extension, is constrained only by what we collectively consider as achievable and desirable. Our new normal must deliver a better way of living for everyone. So this new normal that started off as adapting to live alongside a virus is now grown in size, and the goalposts have been shifted. It's morphed into now adopting a new set of policies, a new idea of government, etc., etc. It's about changing our society. One that also protects our environment from non-existent man-made climate change. You know, the latest to come out in relation to that, if I could find it, is official data reveals the Arctic Sea is once again growing. There is nothing catastrophic, alarming, or even a little worrisome about this data, and it comfortably puts to bed all these prophecies of doom. There was another one that came out last week talking about CO2 levels in the atmosphere, and they're unchanged since this lockdown worldwide started. So it should put to bed the idea of man-made climate change. But as far as I'm concerned, they've repackaged man-made climate change into fighting the coronavirus to save lives, apparently. The same things are occurring under a new name. Anyway, the Social Justice and Fairness Commission has been grappling with a number of fundamental questions that have been brought into even sharper focus by the current pandemic. One of those is the question of how to provide a safety net through a secure income for all. We have been considering a universal basic income, as most socialists do, as a means to provide that safety net, as well as mechanisms that values unpaid work such as caring or volunteering in the community. Now, who's going to pay for all this? And as I said in a video previous to this in relation to this, you people have made these people unemployed. So many companies and businesses will not be able to recover from this lockdown, and the ones that do will in time end up collapsing within themselves anyway, due to the measures relating to your new normal. How are restaurants, etc., going to be able to function and make money and make profit? So you've made a giant population, or percentage of the population, unemployed, and now you're trying to implement universal basic income to keep them happy, while you then proceed with your Agenda 2030 intentions of automation and digital and technological advancements, making people unemployed and then unemployable. But it's okay as long as they've got universal basic income, eh? The current situation is understandably fueling demands for a universal basic income. Oh, problem, reaction, fucking solution, pardon my French. The biggest question is to resolve things going forward and how this could be delivered, but at what level. But just as importantly, how a universal basic income would sit within a wider system of state support. What use is UBI if the cost of living, including essential services, are so high that they negate any benefit? UBI is a starting point, which must be considered alongside how we provide universal services such as childcare, education, healthcare, housing, social care, public transport. It's not an endless pit of money to spend. We're apparently going to be going into a gigantic recession after this, worse than the 2008 financial crash, as planned, I presume, or I believe anyway. But yet, they've got all this money to pluck out of thin air, supposedly. Just before the pandemic hit in Scotland, the Social Justice and Fairness Commission was about to launch the next phase in our consultation process and undertake a series of national assemblies to discuss three key areas we were focusing on: health and well-being, providing a secure income for all, and providing homes and communities for all. Providing communities for all. All, obviously, open brackets, all the little poor oppressed minorities. My mother has been on the housing waiting list, the council waiting list, since before I was born. So that's over 24 years ago. But yet Abdul gets a house within a matter of months. However, we feel the time is right to open up that discussion. We are therefore making our consultation website live. Responses can be submitted by individuals, or people who can use the toolkit to hold online group discussions. We'll also be reaching out through social media to bring the discussion into homes across Scotland. As a commission, we have always wanted our work to be open and inclusive, and for consultations to inform our work every step of the way. In light of current circumstances, we want to reach out in a slightly different way, so we will be publishing discussion papers based on options we are considering. These are some fantastic, thought-provoking pieces being published right now, and we want to harness the very best of those discussions to inform our work. Now let's get a little look at their introduction, their Social Justice and Fairness Commission Toolkit. These consultations, of course, that go live on the SNP or the Scottish Government's websites, they're a scam, because the people responsible for the likes of the Social Justice and Fairness Commission, the people on these panels, people like them create consultations, and then people like them that are not part of these panels are the ones that fill them out. Rarely do the public bother to submit their reviews or their ideas and their opinions and whatnot. And rarely do the public even know that they have the ability to do that. So it's a scam. They have ideas in the pipeline, they present them as public-wide, and the only people that decide to fill these things out are people identical to the ones responsible for it being churned out in the first place. So it says the Social Justice and Fairness Commission was established by the Rainbow Unicorn Land Commander Nicola Thinlips to focus on delivering a route map to the real prize of independence, a truly rich society with well-being at its heart. There's your first problem. They wouldn't have a leg to stand on if poverty, for example, wasn't a major factor in Scotland these days. If Scotland's poverty rate wasn't increasing, these people wouldn't be able to stand there and talk about ideas to solve the problem of poverty. So explain to me how this is all going to result in us being a truly rich society when 12 years of the Rainbow Unicorn Land government's power, or tenure of power, has resulted in the poverty or the rate of poverty being so high today. What are they going to do differently? Oh, it's austerity, of course. The Social Justice and Fairness Commission will help to build the case for independence, showing how, with full powers, Rainbow Unicorn Land can tackle poverty and create a fairer society for black people and brown people and Muslims and feminists, etc. However, in undertaking this work, the Commission would also be able to identify potential action that could be delivered to make Rainbow Unicorn Land a better place to live and work for us all. As we look to rebuild from the current non-existent crisis created by the pandemic, our work has a vital role to play in harnessing the very best ideas being discussed. Remit. The aim of the Social Justice and Fairness Commission is to deliver a route map to the real prize of independence, a new social contract between our government and our citizens, a social contract that will build inclusive, rights-based society, a rights-based society. There they are again, talking about human rights, sustainable development, human rights. Where's that all coming from? That's the UN. That's the UN's laws being integrated and superseding our own laws. And you think that these people are thinking this stuff up at the cuff of their heads? They're being innovative. They're all sitting around amongst themselves and coming up with these great ideas and some sort of progressive utopia collusion. No, they're not. It's all derived from the United Nations, which I'll come on to in just a second. We want to deliver our Rainbow Unicorn Land where no one is left behind. Where no one is left behind. Now, where does that come from? Well, leaving no one behind. From the United Nations. From the horse's mouth, of course. They continuously repeat this trope. The Committee for Development Policy addressed multiple dimensions of the pledge to leave no one behind, contained in the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, population control and depopulation to come after. Current trends identified by the committee do not point to a degree or speed of advance compatible with the time frame of the 2030 Agenda, yada yada. Demographic imbalances, including the trends in poverty, particularly in rural areas, and low-income countries in sub-Saharan Africa, education, housing and other areas. Demographic imbalances, including rapid population growth in certain countries, particularly low-income countries, declining fertility rates and ageing populations in others, thanks to your social engineering, and the large share of young people in internal and international migration generate additional challenges to meeting the pledge to leaving no one behind. Extreme inequalities persist within countries and sites as well as and cities as well as among other countries. Now, how are you going to mitigate or reduce the so-called worldwide inequality in relation to immigration? How are you going to do that? Well, as it said just above that paragraph I read in relation to our aging population, they want to bring people over here, the new Scots if you will, and they want to ease the burden of the overpopulated countries to try and somehow reduce poverty and reduce inequality worldwide. It's just... Anyway, extreme inequality persists within countries and cities as well as among countries and cities as well as among countries. In many different contexts, people are being pushed further behind by a variety of forces, including globalization, technological developments, gender discrimination, non-existent man-made climate change, and other forms of environmental degradation that lead to the loss of access to land, livelihoods and jobs, yada yada. Many countries in particular, the least developed, still lack the productive capacity necessary to step on a path towards sustainable development. Economic growth does not necessarily lead to the reduction of inequality, poverty and deprivation, nor to the creation of decent jobs. The experiences of certain countries show that it is possible to make significant advances towards leaving no one behind in relatively short periods of time, but a generalised shift towards development that leaves no one behind requires the transformation of deeply rooted systems, economic and political systems, government structures and business models that are often based on unequal distributions of wealth and of decision-making power. It is not enough to address inequality by focusing on those left behind at the bottom. It's also necessary to address the concentration of wealth, income and decision-making. Oh, the irony, considering this lockdown has made those at the top a lot more rich. The pledge to leave no one behind is seldom disputed in principle, but the complexity of its practical implementation is often sufficiently acknowledged. Trade-offs in the path towards the achievement of leaving no one behind must be understood and addressed. Yada yada. Furthermore, the policy choices most effective in leaving no one behind may not be those targeting specific groups, but a combination of microeconomic and fiscal policies conducive to equitable, sustainable growth, productive capacity development, mechanisms that empower and actively encourage the participation of all in relevant decision-making processes and ensure the respect, protection and fulfilment of human rights, and transformative social policies that combine universal and targeted actions as well as pre-market, in-market and post-market redistribution. Yeah. Where change represents a threat or perceived threat to the established interests of the most influential groups, there is likely to be resistance. Thus, it is not enough to address inequality by focusing on those left behind at the bottom. It's also necessary to address the concentration of wealth, income and decision-making power at the top. Resistance to change is all the more likely in highly unequal societies where the most influential groups are able to protect themselves through institutional capture and private solutions from the cost of risk associated with inaction. That's great and all, but they continuously use the idea of the rich within one country against the poor within one country as their scapegoat. But what they're talking about here is the rich countries, as it says above that in the paragraph. The extreme inequality persists in multiple dimensions within countries and between countries. So when they talk about leaving no one behind and they start to modernise and transform our society, that is not really for the benefit of the people they claim it's for, apart from their little poor oppressed minorities, etc. It's for the bigger picture. Anyway, that said, to the extent that those with greater power, greater economic and political power can exclude themselves from the cost of environmental degradation while reaping the benefits, there is no incentive to fundamentally change unsustainable consumption and production practices. The concentration of toxic waste disposal sites in poor areas and illegal transboundary shipment of hazardous waste, and the fact that the burden of climate change, non-existent man-made climate change, falls disproportionately in those countries that have historically contributed the least to the problem that doesn't fucking exist. Anyway, similarly, there is little incentive to allocate resources to investment in building the resilience of low-income communities to extreme weather events if the most influential groups have access to high-quality and safe housing infrastructure and the less vulnerable areas of the cities, and the poor have no voice in the determination of resource allocation. You see where this is all going? This stuff is utter bollocks. How much money has been poured into Africa, for example, by the West over the years? Why does it never reach their intended target? That's not our fault. Anyway, while political and physical barriers can be erected between poor and rich people and countries, incentives for the latter to meaningfully support the former are scarce. Reactions to migratory flows towards rich countries, for instance, have leaned towards the further strengthening of barriers rather than to a concerted effort to address the root causes. You fucking people. To leave no one behind is not enough to address the problems of those at the bottom. It's also necessary to address extreme intra and international inequalities and the concentration of wealth and political power. So, you get the idea. Building on the Scottish Government's commitment to well-being, where we are focused on the well-being of our society as the performance of our economy, and where we judge our success not just by GDP, because we're not going to be making very much in the GDP front in the coming years, in case you haven't noticed, but by the health and well-being of our nation. As long as the nanny state has everybody catered for the time being, that's all that matters. The Commission will set out how the proceeds of economic growth in an independent Scotland can be shared much more fairly and secure better outcomes. It will look at how we can be a nation that sets a gold standard for equal pay and creates opportunity for all young people, as well as ensuring our old people do not face poverty and loneliness. Develop proposals for a vision of independence that ensures a safe, warm home and community for everyone to live in and a fair chance for everyone to get on in life, because they currently don't, you see. Going back to the video I played of those two wonkers, you know, that guy Gurney, about the percentage of black people in his constituency, and comparing that to the amount of black people that happen to be in the council, and because they're not equal on paper, that somehow demonstrates inequality and rampant racism from the evil white man. You know, this is the sort of bollocks we're talking about here. So on paper, it appears as if this is great stuff. But think about it. Use your fucking noggin, pardon my French. And then, of course, they mention it there. Bringing an end to the shameful Westminster system, which in 21st century Scotland leaves people without enough money to feed their families at the end of the week, while the SNP piss billions away millions away on social justice related causes, redistribute our wealth currently as we speak under a climate change justice fund to Malawi and Zambia, and as far as I'm aware, now Pakistan. They're redistributing our wealth into all these organisations, into all these ridiculous causes, while our own people have to go to food banks, while our own people are homeless, while our own people end up suicidal or whatever the case may be. Our own problems. What happened to charity begins at home? No, of course not. They blame Westminster. When is this shit going to stop? People need to stop voting for this cancerous party, man. I'm about to lose my head. Working with the projected revenues of an independent Scotland in the European Union. Are you having a laugh? The Commission full of social justice communists, will set out key actions that can be taken in the short, medium and long term. Yeah, man, I just can't. I'm going to leave on that note.